Greetings, my good and faithful squires. Welcome to the quest for life. We begin our journey in Saga 1, Maps. And so our adventure begins. Saga 1. On the other side of the valley, in the town of everyone knows and never questions, from which you were born, stood you. And from this place, you set out in the direction you were told you should go. You followed everyone's directions, every shoulder tap, and listened to every critique on how you should get there with no map, to the treasure you were told you should find, because it was the meaning of life. It would appear that you can't ask directions from people who are just as lost as you. And what happened was, you started here, and you ended up into the deep, dark woods, and every time you got to a point where you didn't know where you were, you asked for directions, they would tell you which way you should go. But they would only tell you as far as they would know. So there would be an obstacle, these mountains in the way. And people would believe that that's as far as you can go, that there's nothing beyond that. And then some people know that there's something beyond that. And some people go. Maybe like half the people go. And then most of them just they stop. They stop at that obstacle, that mountain, and say, I can't surpass that, I can't go over that, and nothing exists beyond that. And so they just keep going around the same cycles, and then you're lost in the woods with no map. You wander so far off from where you've been and where you came from, but you don't know where you are. You don't know where to go. So I guess you have two options. Stay there and accept your fate, surviving as a New Age Tarzan, or die of dysentery. Womp womp. Or two, which is the likely better option, is to look up, to begin to look up, to begin to ascend and climb up and see what's beyond this obstacle. In other words, you have to get a new perspective, get a bird's eye view. So that's what you did, and you were able to see that there was a settlement just over that ridge. You could see that there was something beyond it. So you headed off in that direction until you reached the town's edge, where the sign read,
Welcome to the last place where people settle. It's not the best.
And that's where you see me. And, the reason why you came up to me and seen me here, is because I have this here map. What are you looking for one of these? I drew it myself. But, whoa, because, it has, all the points on it, like towns and stuff like that, but I only know how to get to the places on this map that I've already been to, because here's the thing, there's no routes on this map. I've had to fill them in. Let's just say that I can help get you oriented. So, let's take to higher ground and get a bird's eye view. Conclusions I got out of undergrad studies. Our reality is constructed. It's not as concrete as we think it is. Reality is much more contrived than you can imagine. What you know is not all there is. In fact, much of what we're told about life is an all-out lie, told through the scope of generational curses and trauma being passed down. Our brains construct our realities. One example of this can be seen in a 1964 study done by David H. Hubel and Torsten N. Wiesel. Hubel and Wiesel took two cohorts of kittens during infancy and separated them into two environments. One environment had vertical stimuli. It was black and white stripes going vertically on absolutely everything. And the second environment was horizontal black and white stripes on everything. So for the first 2 weeks, these cats were subjected to these environments and only saw these specific stimuli, only vertical or only horizontal stripes. Sam Keene of Psychology Today writes, the results were startling. Cats raised in one environment were blind, literally blind, to any lines running in the other way. cats raised in a horizontal world, for instance, could see the seats of chairs just fine and would jump up onto them to nap, but they couldn't see the chair's legs at all and consistently banged into them. The vertical world cats had the opposite problem. They weaved around the chair legs like champs, but could never find a cozy spot to snooze. These experiments provided some of the first and best evidence for the existence of critical windows in brain development. The basic idea is that the brain, which is plastic when young, must be exposed to certain sights early in life, or it will remain blind to those sights forever. In this case, because the vertical world and the horizontal world cats never saw any differently oriented lines during the critical windows, their brains ended up dedicating all of their vision neurons to one orientation and neglecting the other. The key points that he highlights here is that humans raised in modern cities tend to notice horizontal and vertical lines more quickly than lines at other orientations. People raised in nomadic tribes do better job noticing lines skewed at intermediate angles. A study on cats shows that if they're not exposed to these lines early on, they won't be able to see them. And so what I would like to add to this is it's because of synaptic pruning in your brain. So you're born with a really dense network of wiring in your brain. And during development, your brain tells you what is important and what is not important for your world, to program your brain to be a human being. And anything outside of being a human being, it will clip those out during synaptic pruning. Different cultures and different environments produce different perceptions in people. That, coupled with people's lived experiences, change the way that we perceive things. That's the way that we actually take in information. So, fun fact, if you tie a baby elephant to a stick and you raise it that way, it doesn't matter how big that baby elephant grows, it's going to believe that that stick is its prison, that rope and that stick is keeping it there, even though it's this ginormous thing now that could very obviously pull that little stick out of the ground. If you put fleas inside of a jar and put a lid on that jar for 3 days, you take the lid off and the fleas will not jump out of the jar. So also, not only are we programmed to only perceive certain things based on our environments and our experiences, but we can also take in stimuli and then not process it. So even if we get to the point where we can see what's in front of us, our brain, our reticular activating system, might filter that out before it even goes to the processing centers in the brain. I mean, this is the visual light spectrum that we can see. And we only see a very, very, very tiny bit of all the stimuli that there is to see, or perceive, for that matter at all, that's out there to perceive. We can only perceive and take in and process a small fraction of the light spectrum and those frequencies. We can only perceive a small fraction of all of the auditory stimuli, for example. We simply lack the structures and receptors needed in order to perceive these things. But they do exist. Yes, they do. They exist, even though we can't perceive them ourselves. But our reality of what is possible and what exists is all based on what we can perceive and what we were taught was possible. Carl Sagan explains how we could not possibly perceive a fourth dimensional figure because our brains simply cannot possibly fathom what that would be like by explaining a one-dimensional or two-dimensional world with a three-dimensional figure passing through, an apple passing through a piece of paper world. So if you're like a flat person and an apple goes through that world, all of that two-dimensional person would see is little slices of the apple passing through their world. They wouldn't understand or even have the capacity to wrap their head around what exactly they were seeing. Like their brains are simply built to only perceive a two-dimensional world. And so our reality is limited by our perception. Now, I'd really like to encourage you guys to go check out this cool video by Dr. David Engelman. It's really great. It's called The Limits of Human Perception, and I'll link it below. I've also put a link for the Carl Sagan video. So, I think it's safe to say that we don't perceive the same worlds even as humans. We all have different experiences, different challenges, different cultures, different traumas, everything that's wired us completely differently. I met somebody once. We were jamming in the back of his van down in Ojai. I was just traveling through, going to see my friend, Sammy. And I was like, cool song, man. What's the name of it? He was like, I call it Cool Blue. And I'm like, yeah, that fits. How'd you come up with it? And he was like, well, it's the color of the song. I was like, wait. The color of the song? Yeah, he was like, it's cool blue and it's rushing through. And I was like, oh, you have I can't say it, synesthesia. And he did not know that nobody else, or it's a rare occurrence rather, to see sound. He didn't realize that his way of perceiving, his perception, was unique to him. Not everybody perceives the same things, and especially not in the same way. Our brains take lines and the way that light refracts off of certain things in line segments and then encodes those into a code, and it constructs these images in your brain. Sound waves go in your ear and create pressure that produce movement in the ossicles, the bones in your inner ear, the malleus, incus, and stapes. And basically what it's doing is it's creating like a pressure pump, pumping fluid through this spiral in the inner ear, and that fluid is moving along some receptors. It's converted into an electrical signal and then perceived. The only thing that makes it different from an electrical signal is the meaning that we and our brains apply to it. And again, the way that your brain receives this information is highly variable on all of everything from the time that you were even in the womb. And I say this because perception is what is the foundation of our perspective on everything in life. Culture and society has a deep impact on how we perceive everything, how we move about, how we live our lives. Our parents, our schools, our government are all a part of our culture, which dictates how we move up and down the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'll explain in part 2. But, you know, like that song, sometimes you gotta be lost if you want to be found. It's called Find Another Reason Why by Judah and the Lion. If you want to be found, first you have to understand how really lost you are. In this perspective, down in the trees, no direction. But I hope you elevate, I hope you look up, and I hope you see shooting stars, and that settlement just on the other side of the ridge. Because in order to find what's beyond the land of fear and mediocrity, in order to find more, you have to first believe that there is more, and you are entirely worthy of more.